LinkedIn. So if you have all about unbox, you can always drop me a line. So I think that's all from me. Thanks so much for being here, and I really hope the session is helpful. I will hand it over to Maggie.
Amazing. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Just a small note, something's going on in my co-working building with the internet. So if something happens, I'll reconnect from my phone and hopefully the internet's better there. But I'm so happy to be here. Millie and I have been connecting for months now about the synergies between Nova Chief of Staff and Generalist World. And I think we're both kind of on the same path of trying to empower people and take charge of their careers and find resources and just know that you are where you should be and help you articulate all the things that you're good at and all of that. So I am the founder of Nova Chief of Staff. We launched a Chief of Staff certification course last summer. So about 15, 16 months ago, and we have over 600 students across 22 countries at this point, with folks just having great experiences, which just warms my heart so much. So I put my LinkedIn information in the comments. Feel free to connect with me. I would love to connect with you. And really, like, we can just dive on in. So Millie, please feel free to pop in with questions, with the survey results, like what people want to talk about. That's really where I want to go today. So folks, if you guys have questions that are burning or that, you haven't heard me chat about, please put them in. Like, we can tailor this however this group wants to chat. I don't have to kind of just go my own route of my speaking notes. So please feel free to chat through that. Okay. So what are you most interested in learning today? Required skills, career advice, key responsibilities, Chief of Staff role definition, project management tips. Okay. Awesome. So required skills is pretty big on there. That's good to know. And people considering the role, sounds like the majority of the call is kind of considering, like, what do we think about Chief of Staff? This might be the next thing for me. So if you can just do me a favor and pop any specific questions into the chat, we'll make sure that those come through. Millie, feel free to just raise your hand at me and come off me. Let me know what you guys want to dive into. But I think where we're going to start is the definition. So we won't spend too much time there, but it's a good place to start, kind of level set the definition. I also usually like to talk about the difference between EA and Chief of Staff. A lot of us on the call may already know this, and a lot may not. And it's a blurry area. So we'll chat through that as well. And then we can talk through what makes somebody a great Chief of Staff, the skills as listed here that people want to hear about. What are the required skills? What makes you a strong Chief of Staff? And we can just talk about too, it's not exactly on here. Well, I guess the key responsibilities, like, what does just a Chief of Staff do every day? And it can vary a lot, but there's quite a few similarities as well. So does that sound good to everybody? Okay. Awesome. All right. So to start out here, Chief of Staff defined. This is my longer definition, so I'll kind of read it slowly here from my notes. But a Chief of Staff is the business leader's strategic thought partner who's excellent at execution and allows the business leader to focus on what's most important: vision, growth, strategy, leadership. So just like an executive assistant, the Chief of Staff supports the leader directly. So it's one of those few roles that really exists to serve a person versus the company. But the Chief of Staff role is this highly strategic position that at its core is focused on driving the leader's kind of most important priorities and initiatives forward quickly and efficiently, solving problems, removing roadblocks. The Chief of Staff often also acts as proxy or advisor to the leader and leads major cross-functional projects as needed. So you may have seen some Chief of Staff leveling framework out there. The Chief of Staff Network has one that's very detailed, useful for certain situations. Nova, we created one that's a lot more simplified to help folks understand the key differences between kind of the seniority and range and levels of the Chief of Staff role, which I think is helpful and important. So across the board, the Chief of Staff role exists for the same purpose. So even if the day-to-day of the role is different everywhere, you've got different leaders, different products, different industries, different companies, could go on and on. The core purpose of the role is the same, which I just kind of shared that definition: to support that leader, maximize their time, drive alignment on their executive team, et cetera. But when it comes to the seniority, the seniority levels of a Chief of Staff will vary. And the more senior chiefs of staff are going to lead much larger cross-functional projects like company-wide initiatives potentially. And they're going to step into more proxy and advisor roles for the CEO. So the chief of staff role exists at many, many different levels. It obviously exists at different titles, exists at different levels in terms of manager, director, VP, executive. But those titles and those levels don't necessarily very specifically indicate exactly the seniority level that the company is kind of having the chief of staff act in. You could be a chief of staff, like manager title startup, advising the CEO and acting as their proxy. You could also be a VP level chief of staff at a company and, be doing kind of the main core purposes of the chief of staff role, but maybe you're in less of an advisory role. So a bit of nuance there, as always with everything chief of staff. There's a lot to go into. Okay, so the core difference between executive assistant and chief of staff. I describe an executive assistant as a highly skilled problem solver, a strategic doer, and the logistical mastermind behind their executive's calendar, travel, expenses, etc., while acting as the go-to support lead for tactical items across the executive team. So, like anyone in a career growth moment or any high achiever looking to grab more responsibility, an executive assistant may reach for a chief of staff responsibility or just like a greater responsibility focused assignment or task or strategic initiative. They could fill a gap and lead a project or any of those things. But when you think about the other way around, a chief of staff almost never is going to have the core functions of EA work, which are calendar, inbox, travel, expense, logistics. The chief of staff should have understanding, insight, not necessarily oversight in the ownership perspective, but full view, full picture of all the things going on. To get really tactical, I usually suggest that the chief of staff has view access on the leader's calendar, but they don't need edit access. That's what the EA owns. How's that? How are we feeling?
Feeling great. And I think we've got loads of questions rolling in now. I don't know if you want to dive straight into them, Maggie, or if you, what do you think? I can read a couple out if helpful.
Yeah, I think we can go two routes. I can chat a little more about difference between chief of staff and like COO, CMO. I can chat through what I think makes you a strong chief of staff and then some of the responsibilities of chief of staff. And then we could dive right into questions, or we can just go into questions and bounce around. It's really up to you guys.
I think give your overview. I think that'll be helpful. And then maybe some of the questions will get answered along the way. And then, so keep the questions rolling in though, everyone. They're excellent.
Okay, awesome. So a few more things that I think is helpful to chat through. I mentioned that the chief of staff role and the executive assistant role are two of really the only functions. And I'd love to like brainstorm a little bit, like what are there other ones? But are two of the only functions that exist to support a human. They exist to support the person, the business leader. And this is different than a very commonly asked question, which is like, what's the difference between chief of staff and chief operating officer? Well, the chief operating officer or a CMO or a CFO, those roles exist to support the company. So of course they're, reporting into the leader and the leader's success is company success and all of that, but they have their own scorecards, their own categories of business. They really exist to drive company initiatives forward. A chief of staff exists to support the leader on their most important initiatives, ensuring their back office is all set, running smoothly. They'll step in to fill important gaps, but it's really on behalf of the leader, depending on what the leader's most important focus is. So that's kind of a critical delineation there between COO and chief of staff. And another thing that's interesting with the chief of staff role that I touched on a bit is that this role of chief of staff exists everywhere and nowhere all at once. And what I mean by that is take Nova's course, for example. 600 students, probably half of them are existing chiefs of staff, maybe half are aspiring. Some are just happy in their current role, which is also great. But I have discussions all day, every day with students and folks like you guys who are looking into chief of staff roles, sharing their insights about their company, et cetera. The chief of staff role exists across every industry. Food and beverage, entertainment, media, big business, small business, startup, healthcare, tech, nonprofit, for-profit, higher education, private private school, high net worth individuals. Like I could just keep going on. And then you walk into any of those businesses and they may never have heard of the role. So it's growing in awareness. The other thing that makes the chief of staff role difficult to understand from like a awareness and education perspective is the title chief of staff. It's probably not the best title for the role, but we're just going with it, right? Like chief of staff, what does that really mean? A lot of chief of staff, I think the statistics that I've seen most recently are about 60 to 70% actually don't have direct reports. So like chief of staff, okay. It makes sense when you think about how they exist to help drive alignment across the leader's team. And that's, the back office, the staff, the executive team. But it's a bit mysterious because it also exists under a lot of other titles. So you'll find chiefs of staff under business planning manager titles and business transformation and business operations and special assistant to the X and executive business partner. And there is just not a super clear hierarchy or super like pointed map of exactly what the title should be, where, or what. So companies may not love the chief of staff title. They may reserve it just for the CEO, or they may just like not be familiar with it. So it's important to start to spot if you're a chief of staff and also who the chiefs of staff are in your company if they're under a different title. And the ways that I usually recommend doing that is like when you go to an all hands meeting, for example, at your business, who's the person behind the scenes, putting the decks together, giving the talk track to the leader, running all the things behind the scenes. That's, the EA usually, but the other folks that are not the EA, who are those people? Who's that person? If you are somebody who is a receiver of like a deck from a VP, let's say, and it's not the VP sending it to you, it's somebody on their team, that might be their chief of staff. Often there's these business operations roles that exist at a lot of levels of the company, and they support in very similar ways to chief of staff. And those people could be like, manager of business operations, and they're kind of the right hand to that business leader, just jumping on the most important initiatives, helping things run smoothly, et cetera. So I'll get into some of those functions. Okay, so who makes a great chief of staff? These are kind of more of the soft side characteristics, but I'm going to list them here. Fast, driven, curious, growth-minded, solid executive presence, achievement-focused, high emotional intelligence. You love the breadth versus depth, and Amelia used the same term I use, expert generalist. Love that. Problem solver, solution-oriented, great at a lot of things, learns quickly, collaborative, influential leader, wants more responsibility, and loves supporting senior leadership. So I think you guys are probably like, oh yeah, also describes all of these amazing generalists. Yes, the chief of staff role is a breadth role. And, it's one of those roles that if you approach it as you need to be an expert in one thing very deeply, you are not going to succeed. A lot of folks have they're kind of their sticking point with should I pursue the chief of staff role is lacking confidence in the financial metrics of maybe the new business that they're considering going into or that they're already in, and they know that the chief of staff role has to be a little bit deeper in the financial world of the business. My advice is always, this is a breadth game, not a depth game. So it's really important to understand the most important metrics that your leader talks about, that their executive team talks about, that really move the needle for the conversations in the company. The biggest, most important 5 to 10 metrics, understand how they work together, how the math works, all of it. And to identify a financial resource to dive deep when you need to. You've got to have the ability to dive deep, but the understanding that that's going to kind of shoot you in the foot if you're always deep in something. So it's a breadth game versus a depth game with the ability to dive deep where you need to. Setting up resources is really important. Building relationships, that kind of high EQ mindset is important. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to talk about before we go to questions then is just like, what does a chief of staff do every day? Great question. And this is where it can really depend on the day-to-day of the business, on the type of business you're in, on the leaders' opportunities and what gaps you may fill for them, or what they shouldn't be doing, or what they like to do and they would rather you do something else instead. It can depend on a lot. But I'm going to go through a handful of things. So business planning. Business planning includes that rhythm of business that we talked about. And that is really, truly, essentially the rhythm that drives the business. I'm not explaining it very well yet, but you'll get there with me. What is the rhythm that drives the business? It's the approvals the leader needs to give. It's the meetings that you have. It's the one-on-ones that with the executive team. It's the flow of information to your leader that then leads to the business moving forward efficiently and quickly. So as a chief of staff, one of the first things you should do is learn and understand and document the current rhythm of business, knowing that it's flexible, knowing that it's going to change, just like anything in an executive's back office. It's chaotic, lots of moving pieces, changes a lot. But we want to document the rhythm of business. So what does that look like? What are all the sessions the leader's attending? When are they, and how do we categorize them? When are they looking back at past business? When are we looking down at current operational items, product launches, employee metrics, turn, those things? And when are we looking forward at future planning, next month, next year, 5-year planning? There's obviously a lot of sessions happening in there, and they can be categorized in a lot of different ways. Cadence, the kind of purview, like I was just talking about, back, current, forward, who's there, the purpose of the meeting, the outcomes planned, all of those things. That's essentially the rhythm of business. And the chief of staff should be responsible for ensuring that people are showing up prepared, that follow-ups are captured and actioned, that that the sessions are a good use of time, and that the chief of staff is making recommendations to improve the rhythm of business at all times, because we should always be focused on that business leader's time and their efficiency of their time, because that's why we exist as chiefs of staff. Okay, so rhythm of business, it also would include things like making sure your leader's prepared for everything they walk into. Is there a brief process for every meeting that they need one for? Who's building the brief? Now, a lot of these things might sound like, dang, that's a lot for the chief of staff to do. The chief of staff role needs to be excellent with execution for sure. But if they take on everything as their work streams and they're doing it all, they're not going to succeed as a chief of staff. It's about identifying the opportunities, building the process, identifying the people to continue along with the process, helping things launch, approving, driving things forward. So the brief process is a good example of that. It might be the sales team that starts the brief, triggered by maybe a chief of staff or an executive assistant note about a meeting coming up. It might be the executive assistant that then adds a bunch of details. It might be the chief of staff that signs off and delivers it to the leader. The process can happen in different ways, but the chief of staff is ensuring at a high level that the leader's prepared for everything they walk into. Okay, so executive prioritization and project management. If you've worked in an executive office before, or if you've worked with founders, we've all got a lot of ideas all the time. And I'm like chief of staff / founder. So now I fit into both categories. But if you've worked with a CEO, entrepreneur, it's like there are just a million ideas being thrown all over the place. And it can be chaotic. And it can feel as a leader that it's hard to stay in the vision space if those ideas aren't captured, organized, prioritized by somebody on your team. And so the chief of staff should be stepping in to essentially manage, organize, prioritize the executive's most important initiatives. Sometimes they're owning some, sometimes they're making sure the information flow is right with the rhythm of business. So there's some of that there. Just moving quickly through the last few here, process improvement, identifying roadblocks, solving problems, kind of that general driving efficiency, helping your business move forward more effectively, more efficiently. filling gaps. Maybe it's projects that need ownership. There's a lot of gaps to fill in an executive back office that don't have a place to land. And then finally, there is an element of sometimes oversight, sometimes being the executor of communications and events. So there's other people usually involved in key big events too. But if somebody's not spearheading, kind of leading from a project management perspective, that falls on the leader, and we don't want that. So the chief of staff's often in the place of kind of that executive project manager of some of the most important initiatives, most important events, to make sure that all the doers, all the process, all the things are captured and moving along, and they're, potentially throwing, the weekly update meetings and all of that. So final thing I'll say here, it really depends on your business, what you may be stepping into as a chief of staff. You may have an executive who is an excellent writer, and they want to write all their own employee comms, something like the murder of George Floyd, and your leader is really well positioned to send a heartfelt note, and they're a strong writer and they like connecting with their team. They may just do that themselves. On the other hand, you may have a leader that just doesn't really think that way, doesn't think about, I should be reaching out to my employee base in this instance, or maybe they're not as strong of a writer, or they don't have that muscle or that process built in. You may be the person drafting or at least approving some of those comms. So that's just one example of how chiefs of staff are going to step into some of these places dependent on what's needed. But hopefully that kind of illuminates a bunch of the key responsibilities of chief of staff work. So with that, I'll have a sip of coffee and we can go through some questions. And Millie, I'll let you guys kind of go through questions and ask me what you think we should talk about.
Awesome. I'm just taking a look. We've got a bunch of questions. I can see that Etcha has just put a poll up. So of all the things you've just heard from Maggie, can you answer the question, how confident do you feel about understanding the chief of staff role now? There's obviously a lot to unpack. Hopefully there is a bit more clarity. I know that it definitely answered some questions for me. And we can get into some of the questions. Let's see. There was one, there we go, 10 out of 10. That is, there you go. Nailed it, Maggie. I guess we're done. The job is done. Okay. Let's see. There's a great question here from Eric. So while we know that chief of staff are expert generalists, does the real world give preference to those with the industry experience? For example, are tech industries given preference to for a chief of staff with tech experience? Like, how well does that translate in the real world?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that it goes both ways for sure. So there are going to be there's many job descriptions out there where folks hiring for chief of staff roles that have certain requirements, and the requirements could be MBA or previous consulting experience or this industry experience. And then there's a lot of people out there hiring for chiefs of staff roles that I think, like other roles too, understand that there's a lot of value in having somebody who may not necessarily be the industry expert, that might not be the most important thing. And for a chief of staff, I would argue that it's definitely not the most important thing. The most important thing is that you can solve problems for your leader and maximize their time and drive efficiency across their team and visibility and all of those things. It's chiefs of staff ideally are quick learners, and they're curious and they ask good questions to learn and understand the industry. But I think if you're looking for a chief of staff role, that's what you should be highlighting if it's in an industry you don't have experience in. There's a lot of learnings you can bring to a place you've never been because you've never heard a no. You've never heard how it's supposed to be, and there's, like I went into the telecom industry, talk about technology that you can't describe or understand or tell somebody how it works. It really did not matter that I was not a tech expert. And I'll tell you that everybody else I worked with, almost, besides the highly, highly technical people, they were in the same boat as me.
Fantastic. On that same vein, on that same thread, can we talk about the best ways to communicate your own value prop when you're thinking about writing your resume or posting on LinkedIn? and you're really going for the chief of staff role, what should people be thinking about? What should they be really trying to communicate?
Yeah, love this question. I think what we need to do here is tailor your resume to the chief of staff style language and talking points and activities that you've done in the past. So we're all in charge of the 4 or 5 bullets that we put under a job, right? From our experience. So how do you articulate those bullets as relating enough to chief of staff type work? So let's say you were let's say you were like a project manager, but then on the side, you sort of did a bunch of side projects for your leader. This is what you would want to highlight. You'd want to highlight filling gaps for a business leader and taking the lead, cross-functional collaboration, like the kinds of things that can tie back to chief of staff work. And that's what you want to highlight on your resume. If you take it a step further and you've now realized, oh my gosh, I'm a chief of staff and I didn't even know it, I would suggest working potentially with your leader to see if they're okay with you using a term like de facto chief of staff or acting chief of staff for your title. As long as you feel comfortable with it, it's genuine, and your leader, would support that. Language is important, and understand it. And the chief of staff role is hard to articulate. It's hard to talk about. So working really hard to make sure your resume is tailored to the chief of staff style experience and talking points, I think is really important.
Yeah, there's been a few questions coming up about this, basically about this language, particularly across like the US and the UK and different size businesses. I guess from your experience, how have you seen people kind of get buy-in from their CEO? Let's say the CEO doesn't understand, but like someone in this room is like, you actually need this. How do they go about kind of pitching that chief of staff role?
Yeah. And this is a really real thing. A lot of people and a lot of leaders, CEOs, business leaders, they don't understand the chief of staff role, or it's a new term, or there's not a lot of awareness or education yet. So I think it's first about helping drive awareness and education about the role. You first deeply feeling like you can articulate it, that you have resources to help. Of course, novachiefofstaff.com, like we're happy to help you. And we have a bunch of free resources in our free resource library about pitching chief of staff roles and tailoring your pitch to what you're good at and reflecting on what those things are, et cetera. But it just kind of depends on the situation. So Millie, if you're already working with that leader in a different capacity, but you're taking on some of these chief of staff functions, and you're able to have some sort of conversations with your leader about, here's the things that I'm doing, and you've educated them a bit about the chief of staff role. These actually fall into this chief of staff bucket over here. They are assisting you in these ways. I think you would agree with me that these are high value activities for you. I would suggest and recommend, and I'd be happy to put a more formal proposal together to move into this role more, full-time, and then we backfill for this other responsibility. I think it's about deeply understanding the role and deeply understanding the work that you're doing or that you want to be doing, and then thinking about how do you pitch that to the leader based on what they need the most, and doing it that way.
That's really helpful. I think one of my favorite rules is the show don't tell rule. So it's like, this is actually what I'm already doing, and this is the business case. You got to make it like a no-brainer for them to be like, oh yeah, like that makes complete sense.
I love that. Yeah.
We've got an interesting question here, kind of about experience level. So someone, anonymous, has been seeing lots of chief of staff roles, but they're quite junior. So they're between 2 and 4 years of experience. Well, firstly, do you have any stats on average like experience level? And then secondly, if someone has, say, 15 years of experience, more at that mid to senior level, what advice would you have for them?
Yeah, stat-wise, I think I just did see a statistic about this. It will be, I have a cheat sheet coming out soon on LinkedIn. I think we're talk about this with experience level a bit, but I don't want to get it wrong, so I'm not going to reference it. But I will tell you anecdotally that there are a lot of ranges in experience. And the reason for that is because there's a lot of different company levels of maturity and a lot of executive levels of funding and company, levels in where they are in their startup land, or they've been around for ages, Or if the leader is super senior and they're looking for that proxy, that advisor, they're going to look for somebody who's more tenured. There's not a lot we can do once the job description's out to change someone's mind. So I think that's a tough one, saying, okay, this job description is asking for less experience. I would focus more on what are the responsibilities, making sure that they are not including executive assistant responsibilities. That's a no-no. You shouldn't do both roles, but people try to combine them because they don't know. You just can't be an effective chief of staff if you're also managing calendar, inbox, expenses, travel, logistics. It's like too much. And obviously, like if you're not an executive assistant, you don't want to then be taking on a chief of staff role, doing EA duties. It doesn't make any sense. So look at what the job entails. If the pay is right and the activities are right, but they're asking for less experience, I would think that they're probably looking for kind of somebody who's moldable and fresh out of school, and maybe is going to kind of give that like youthful energy of just jumping into things. And I would ask more questions around culture, and then think about how you position yourself as a fast learner, adaptable, quick to technology. You work really well across generations, like all of those things based on what you're learning from the job description. So the job descriptions can really range, but yeah, I see them all. They're all out there. High level of experience, usually tied to higher comp, but not always. Less experience, sometimes accidentally or not accidentally, but incorrectly tied to executive assistant duties as well, which stay away from ideally. But yeah, just deeply figure out that JD. Yeah.
So they're out there. We know they're out there. The next question is from Luciana, and she's wondering, is it a role that is advertised? So if they're out there, is this like, where are we looking? Are we on LinkedIn? Are we on Indeed? Or is this one of those things where you got to know the right person who will kind of send you a DM? Where do people find these roles?
Okay, great question, Luciana, and well-timed, Billy, because this is exactly what we should be chatting through after, this last question. The chief of staff role is a high trust position. If you're a business leader, you're bringing someone in to be side by side with you for like at least a couple years, probably. That is one of the most high trust relational positions that exist. So, remove chief of staff, remove any of those things. It's going to make more sense to find somebody in your network who you already trust to fill that role. There's a lot of chief of staff roles out there that are advertised externally. But I think it's around 60% to 2/3 that are internal hires or somebody that the leader already knows. What I like to talk about in kind of this sphere here is because there's a lack of awareness and education around the chief of staff role. Like leaders have known for a long time that they need administrative support. They shouldn't be doing those activities themselves, and they're catching on now that they need high level strategic executional support as well via chief of staff. But it's still up and coming, and it's still a very unknown role. What I usually recommend folks who are looking for jobs is to network like crazy from a place of it's almost like you're pitching yourself as a consultant, but potentially they could easily, in the same vein of hiring you as a consultant when they've never really known much about chief of staff, they could also create a job description that brings you on full time as a chief of staff. So that's where I have seen a lot of people find success is they know a leader, they have a strong relationship with them. They've been talking for a while about the chief of staff role, kind of drip, drip, drip. Here's the benefits. Here's what I'm seeing. Here's what I'm doing. And then, I think you need one. And let me tell you how I can support you. And moving into those conversations around pitching to somebody that may not know they need one, which is not an easy thing. But that's how the chief of staff role is. It's one of the ways the chief of staff role is growing for sure.
Super helpful. Shifting a little bit, if someone has been out of employment, out of formal employment, so they've had a bit of a gap on their resume, on their LinkedIn, is there any advice you have about pivoting and kind of, I guess, turning that into like a real positive and a timely thing to, be able to successfully land a chief of staff role?
I love a good career pause. Whenever I hear that somebody left their job, I say, I really hope you don't feel the pressure to go into something else right now. Like take the time. Take the time to do something for yourself and come back and feel refreshed and focused and tailor your experience to in those conversations of what you've gained and why you took, why you went and traveled or spent time with your family or dug in with your parents and helping them with care or whatever it might be. Like, be transparent about that. I think that the waves in the generation of leadership are changing. I think there's more people. I know Millie's in the same vein as me here. There's more leaders out there like us, like a lot of you on this call, who are like, that's great. Lean into that. You're going to come back stronger and fresher. But we can't change the leaders that don't think that. So when you're interviewing, it's just as important for you to figure out what kind of leader you're talking to and how they'd support you through your years with them. And if that's not something that they understand is helpful and refreshing and life value adding, maybe it's not the role for you.
Snaps. That's all. Love. I feel like I need to take a career break after hearing that.
So side note, I finished my MBA and I had gotten recruited for this executive development program at T-Mobile, which eventually led to my chief of staff role. And it was a really competitive placement. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So I sped up my MBA. I finished a quarter early and I traveled for 4 months in Asia. Nepal and Thailand and India. And it was life-changing. It was incredible. I was post-divorce. It was everything I needed. I became a yoga teacher. Like, what? All I had to focus on for a month was yoga, And I came back thinking, I am so refreshed. I'm now approaching work with a completely different mindset to think about, is this the path I actually want? Or have I been doing this, career climbing for like external factors, right? And I also said to myself, I am not going to let another 5 years go by without a major trip. Again, a major disengagement style trip. Length is less important. But so a couple years ago, my now husband and I, we went to Italy for 5 weeks and it was the same kind of thing. We just leaned into it. It wasn't 4 months in Asia by myself, but it was that kind of a style of trip. Reset. Yeah. So I recommend it.
We need to be talking about this more. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome.
Okay, we've got a goodie here, getting into a bit more of the specifics. Can you give some specific examples? It seems like anything that is a strategic priority of the CEO, I'll bring it up here for you, should be a strategic priority of the people who serve the business. So why wouldn't those people be leading the work?
Good question. And they're leading the work. So if you think about a CEO of a business or a business leader, did these, chiefs of staff exist to business leaders too, like a VP that reports to a president, that reports to an executive, they exist at a lot of levels of the company. So business leader, CEO, you're going to have a lot of ideas for how to improve your business, for what to chase, for what to fix, for what problem to solve, for what platform to install. And some of those are absolutely going to land in the places where you have full ownership. Like you've got the CMO. Okay, great. This marketing initiative is going to land over here. You've got this operations person. Okay, awesome. Those are going to land over here. But there are so many other initiatives and ideas and thoughts, and also not fully formed ideas that are also really important to capture. So the way, and one of the questions that may come up later, but a really important skill for chiefs of staff is excellent executive project management, or project management applied to your executive. So it's understanding your environment, which is going to be different for every chief of staff, and understanding your leader and thinking, okay, they need a place to brainstorm. They need a place to throw out ideas. And some of these might be fully formed. Some of them might not be. They need to be organized, categorized. Some of them need to be, you need to prioritize. Which ones does the leader actually want us to go chase? Should they now be passed off to somebody who exists to lead them? All of those things are going to be at different levels in kind of their growth into the fully formed plan. And some of them are never going to happen. But without a chief of staff or without somebody serving this purpose, yes, you can have a partially formed idea you throw over here or a fully formed idea you throw over here, but you've kind of lost track of them. There's not one place for all of these things to be captured, prioritized, managed, sometimes passed off to somebody to lead. Sometimes the chief of staff, leads them. It's a really, really helpful thing for business leaders to have that kind of like highest radar, most important items just captured. Like I'm kind of thinking of my own situation right now. Nova's doing our first in-person chief of staff certification training in like a week and a half. Wild. And I know there's a few of you on here who will meet in Colorado. So exciting. And as a founder and as in a space like chief of staff where there's a lot of opportunity, I've just got a million ideas all the time. But I'm not sending them to my team right now because we are focused on this conference, right? So where do they land and how do we organize them and prioritize them and come back to them and bucket? Like that is the role of a chief of staff for the leaders that need it.
Oh boy, resonates, big resonates. The ideas are, we're no shortage of them. That's a fact.
Yeah. Yep.
While we're on the subject of skills, there was a question around what someone called a level 1 chief of staff. So I guess kind of that entry level into a chief of staff role. What kind of specific skills would you are required to get into that like early chief of staff role?
Yeah, so level 1 chief of staff is most likely referring to the chief of staff network's leveling framework. And I'll share the framework with, like I do placement at times for chief of staff roles, and I'll share the specific, their framework is very specific. It's very detailed. Level 1, there's 10 things and they're super specific. Level 2 through 5, same. That doesn't work as well for me in practice because I find that it's not always true. It's a good guide, but you could be a director level chief of staff and you could be doing things over here. It's just not quite as formulaic, but it's a helpful guide. So definitely check out the chief of staff network's leveling framework to see like a more complex, very detailed leveling framework. Just know that in practice, I don't see those specific guidelines as often. And then Nova Chief of Staff in our free resource library, you can find it easily online. We have a much more simple framework that kind of talks about level 1, level 2, level 3 being more so that proxy advisor leading major projects with the seniority level. So when we're thinking about the bucket of items that all chiefs of staff should be strong in, I would suggest looking at Nova's leveling framework for level 1. And you're going to see things on there that we've just talked about. Rhythm of business, for example, leader preparedness, removing roadblocks, problem solving. So a lot of those things come down to the ability to pull back and see a business with a 10,000-foot view and to dive in, fast execution, excellent project management. Our Chief of Staff certification course dives deep into 20, 25 hands-on assignments that are doing the things chiefs of staff do every day, building briefs, throwing offsites, writing strategic recommendations, presenting both visually, verbally, and digitally, like on slides, helping with transparency for your executive team. These are all kind of foundational skills that are really helpful to have as a chief of staff. And then, when you think about the EQ perspective, like who's on your team? How are you getting to know them? Are you setting up one-on-ones with all of them? Are you connecting the dots of what they're telling you with what your leader's been saying and then the other executives saying over here? And then how do you take that information and put a recommendation together to improve the business for the most important thing? So there's a synthesis component too. So, skills required. I think you need to, it's such a mix of soft and hard, but I think you need to be able to speak up for yourself, hold yourself confidently, build some form of document that helps drive alignment across your team. And you're going to be building a lot of them. We use PowerPoint. AI will soon be there, but it's not quite there yet for slides. PowerPoint gives the ability to update in a second, and it's branded, it's easy, it's quick. So that's what we use in our teaching, but it'll change soon with AI. But whatever that tool is that you choose to use, how do you keep the information, find the most important information, you're sharing it broadly. There's a lot of things we've kind of talked about on this call that I don't want to like repeat too much, but it's a good question.
Well, what we can do is after this call, we'll send out a post-event email and we can link all of these things so folks can go and follow up and check out particularly the NOVA leveling framework. That sounds awesome. Just a quick one, I guess. It looks like we have a few folks here from the UK. I'm up on a little island in Scotland, and it looks like we have some others who are wondering, is this common in the UK? What have you seen from the people who are taking your NOVA certification?
Yeah, we've got, probably like 6 to 10 folks from the UK in our course. It's growing. It's growing in the UK like it's growing everywhere. So I haven't seen I do hear from folks, it's different in the UK or it's different in Australia or this or that, but I personally haven't seen those differences because I still see the same things in the US. This industry doesn't know about it, or this company doesn't know about it, or the title's not recognized. I do hear the same things in the US and see the same things. So I think that it's a little bit more of a overall global role that's growing, and it's not quite there yet. It may be that in the UK and other countries that it's been around for less time, so it does feel, but it's growing everywhere. We've got 22 different countries represented in our course right now, which is just so cool.
Amazing. So cool. So cool. I just realized we have 5 minutes to go. So Edja actually said that there was, I think, 2 people who wanted to come and do a little like super mini hot seat session where basically they'll come up, they'll have 30 seconds to pitch their question, and then you can give a rapid fire answer. And if they're still here, Edja, I'm not sure actually who they were, so feel free to bring them up on stage.
One of them was Alex, and then the other person was Cameron. So if you're up for being on the stage,
love it.
Let us know on the chat, and then I'll let you unmute and then go on stage. Alex or Cameron?
Me, Alex?
Yeah. Yes, Alex. You want to?
Or if there's anyone, we could probably get through 1, maybe 2 if we're really, really fast. So, Alex, you're good. Let's get Alex up on stage. And Alex, if you want to bring a specific question, and we'll see if we can answer it in like a minute.
Okay. Alex, you should be able to unmute yourself now, and then I'll try to find you. And
can you hear me okay? Okay, awesome. Yeah, so I had a question around, like, I'm a senior project manager at my company, and everything I've looked at into chief of staff roles, I'm really doing now, right? Like on top of the basic like timeline management and risk analysis, like I have built and implemented and I run a monthly stage gate process. I just conducted our first 3-year pipeline build out because it's like we just turned 5. So we're kind of at that stage now. And I'm also like templatizing a lot of things and like really focusing on making sure our resources are aligning with our strategic objectives, as well as owning our PD budget. So wearing a lot of hats per usual, but I think what's tricky is like we already have a chief of staff. And this person I feel like really wears like a brand / like almost EA to the CEO type of role. And I feel like I struggle to know like, what can I do in this role, knowing I have a lot of responsibility to either like ask to adjust the title or hone certain skills within what I'm doing of all these things right now to like better leverage like the next step in my career to be a chief of staff or something similar.
Okay, so is the person that's kind of acting chief or like is the chief of staff now, are they under the chief of staff title, and are they doing EA duties also?
I believe so. They definitely are under the title, and I believe they're doing a lot of things under the sun that are EA related. Like they run our company team meetings that are every other week and things like that.
Okay. Well, I would say start having one-on-ones with everybody on your executives team, including the EA or / chief of staff.
Yeah, I do. I have a lot, which is good. Okay.
Okay, great. So do that. And I think it's important to figure out what responsibilities that chief of staff / EA is doing, so that you can then figure out what holes or gaps you could fill. It's going to be very rare to have a leader have 2 chiefs of staff unless they serve totally different purposes.
Right.
It's not unheard of, but do you pitch it if they already have one? Like, get a little more information on how your leader sees this existing chief of staff and how the existing chiefs of staff sees their role and if they're doing EA work. And then I think if you're already having one-on-ones with everybody, including the leader, I think it's starting to, what are the needs across the executive team? What are the highest priorities and what are you best suited to fill? What are you best suited to jump into based on your skill set and what the team needs, and start dripping and start pitching for that potential change. But I think we need to do a little more discovery first of like what the current environment is. And then if it's not your leader, there's so many other leaders and they may not have a chief of staff. So that's where I would look to for you if it's already
that makes sense.
filled. Okay, good.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Good luck.
All right. Well, I think it is time to wrap things up. Thank you so much, Maggie. That was like an awesome, very interactive one. And thank you everyone for your questions and everything. So we love to end with action points and accountability here in the GW, here in the UK. I'm not even in the UK right now. Here in GW, we love to end our sessions with accountability and action points. So let us know what is something that you've learned today and plan to explore further. And meanwhile, I'm going to plug our upcoming events. So we have our speed networking events coming up, and we're going to have a panel with Climate One, and then we're going to have an interview session with Karen soon. So feel free to join other events if you enjoyed this. Let me check for the answers. So thanks, Maggie. And then, one of the answers is saying, always learn a lot with Maggie. What a nice thing to end it. Cool. Thanks, everyone. Just checking the answer, and then we're going to wrap things up real quick. Lots of explanation, lots of exploration, and then how to start for roles. Okay, and certifications. Cool. I'm going to end the poll and say bye to everyone. See you later, all. Take care. Bye.